This is Tiara speaking. Good afternoon, everyone. We are just going to give folks a few seconds to continue to join. Again, this is Tiara speaking. We welcome you to our forum this afternoon. We are just giving people time to trickle in. Please feel free to take a look at the housekeeping slide that we have on screen. All right, this is Tiara speaking. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiara Yakini, and I'm with the Disability Rights and Compliance Division at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. I will be your moderator for this session today. I am a dark-skinned African-American female with straight Black hair, and I'm wearing an off-white blouse and a Black blazer. For full accessibility, it is critical that speakers first identify themselves by name before proceeding to speak and mute their microphones after they are done speaking. We have ASL interpreters on screen, and live card captioning is available by turning on subtitles using the CC icon on the lower part of the screen. The host will make sure that a spotlight is on all presenters and interpreters. To view both the presenter and the interpreter, along with any presentation materials, please make sure that the gallery view is selected on your personal device. We will have a question and answer portion during today's session, and attendees can use the Q&A function on the lower part of the screen to type in questions for our panelists at any time. With that said, I am happy to welcome you to today's program, which will focus on embracing neurodivergence in public service. In surveys that many of you provided to us in previous sessions, you specifically requested programs on neurodiversity and the differences in ways that people process, receive, and learn information. Our guest presenter for today is prepared to speak to us about just that. Please join me in welcoming scholar and advocate Carrie L. Sherwood, who is going to talk to us about how to better engage neurodiverse individuals in the public service space. Carrie, you now have the platform.
This is Carrie speaking. Thank you for inviting me here today. Hopefully today goes a little bit better as far as internet connectivity and weather than what happened a couple weeks ago. So if any of you are here for the second time, thank you especially. My name is Carrie Sherwood. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a PhD candidate in social work and psychology at the University of Michigan. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about embracing neurodivergence in public service. I am a white female with longer light brown hair, wearing blue-rimmed glasses and a gray blazer with a black t-shirt that says the future is accessible. So before we get started, I just like to tell you a little bit about myself and how I came into this line of work and this line of research. I started out, I had a career in instructional design for about 10 years and designed online training for the mostly the Army, and thought that that was what I was going to be doing for quite a while, if not forever. And then my two children were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when they were 2 and 4 years old. They're now 12 and 14. And so this was about 10 years ago. And at the time that they were going through their diagnoses, I wanted to learn more about autism so I would be able to advocate for them. So I joined an online master's program and graduated from that program. And then through that process, met other professionals and moms, and We ended up starting a nonprofit organization that offered inclusive childcare, therapy, and tutoring in Ohio. That went on for 4 or 5 years probably. And then unfortunately, due to COVID, we ended up having to shut down. But it was around that time that I decided, even though I was still working as an instructional designer for my day job, I decided that I really wanted to dive in further to autism research. And so that's when I joined the PhD program at the University of Michigan, and I've been there for 6 years now, doing mostly autism and employment research with my advisor, Matthew Smith. And yeah, that's a little bit about me and how I got into autism research. I also, about 4 years ago, decided to adopt an autistic teenager from the Michigan foster care system. And so I am now a single mother of 3. And although he did move back in with his birth mom a couple of years ago after he turned 18. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me and how I got into this field. And I just like to start with the disclaimer that although I don't identify as a neurodivergent person, I do have a lot of experience being a parent of neurodivergent children, and I've held a lot of roles working with neurodivergent individuals, whether it be in a volunteer capacity or research capacity. I also briefly worked as a school social worker and a mental health therapist. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started now. On this screen, you'll see an image of my daughter, who this was taken when she was probably 5 or 6 years old, and she has long brown hair and butterfly face paint and a big smile on her face. And so I like to start my presentations with this photo. All right, next slide. Okay, so I just want to start by briefly just mentioning that there are 2 primary models of disability that we can use to view things through. So there's the medical model of disability, which is more of a deficit model. It's the diagnose and treat model that's been around for several hundred years. And then there's also the social model of disability, which has only been around for probably almost 50 years now, I guess. And that model views disability as part of a natural diversity in humans, and kind of has the viewpoint that it's society that disables individuals rather than the disability inherently being something that's within the individual. And so I like to just kind of provide that framework for people before we dive into any talk of neurodiversity, because the neurodiversity movement was really founded based on the social model of disability, which differs from the model that some of us are forced to work in. Next slide. So you might have heard the term neurodiversity, neurotypical, neurodivergence, and maybe wonder what the difference is between all the different terms. The term neurodiversity is really an umbrella term for the others, and it refers to variation in the human brain regarding how we socialize, learn, pay attention, feel, and show emotion, and other mental functions. One of the main premises of neurodiversity is that brain differences are normal. And then with underneath that umbrella of neurodiversity, we have neurotypical and neurodivergence or neurodivergent. And I'll go into a little more detail on the next slide, but on this slide, there is an image of a colorful human brain and a quote that reads, "Neurodiversity may be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general." Next slide. Okay, so neurodivergence refers to the broad spectrum of various types of neurological differences. They diverge from the typical. So that's where the name comes from. The current neurodivergent prevalence estimates are somewhere between 15 and 20% of the global population. So it's a huge number, right? And these are rough estimates considering the underdiagnosis and late diagnosis of females and people of color for most of these conditions. People that are neurodivergent often identify as having one or more conditions or diagnoses. For example, as you can see listed on the screen here, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder, trauma, epilepsy, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, and Tourette's syndrome. Next slide. There are many characteristics associated with neurodivergence. I've listed some of the most common ones here, and we'll talk about each one, but this is not an exhaustive list by any means, due to the, huge amount of individuals that identify as being neurodivergent. The list of characteristics could really go on and on. Next slide. First, we'll talk about social interaction. So neurodivergent individuals often have difficulty forming and keeping relationships. They might have low self-confidence. They're often sensitive to rejection. And research has shown that autistic and non-autistic individuals specifically both rate interactions with their own groups more highly than interactions with the other group. So, for example, when an autistic person is having a social interaction with a non-autistic person, they will both rate that interaction more poorly. So we often think of, there's a right way to interact and a wrong way to interact, but this research really speaks to the idea that it's all relative, right? Okay, next slide. Most of us are familiar with our five senses: smell, sight, taste, touch, and sound. However, there are 3 additional sensory systems that are particularly important for neurodivergent individuals as well. And there's a lot of information on this slide, but this is one of the, I would say, primary characteristics that are often overlooked by people that are not familiar with neurodiversity or neurodivergence. And it's one of the characteristics that often impacts people the most when they are out and about in different environments. So these are probably things that you are going to come across in your work, regardless of what your work is exactly. So a lot of neurodivergent individuals are sensitive to certain smells, like perfumes or certain foods. They may be sensitive to fluorescent lighting. When we talk about our sense of taste or gustatory sense, some neurodivergent individuals may be sensitive to certain foods or have a tendency to put things in their mouths and chew on things. A lot of neurodivergent individuals are also sensitive to certain sounds. So this might be things like school bells or vacuum cleaners, or even just being in a crowded room. And a lot of people wear noise canceling headphones to make up for this. So you might see people wearing noise canceling headphones, although they're starting to make the noise canceling headphones that actually fit in the ears, so might be a little more discreet. When we talk about our sense of touch, some neurodivergent individuals are sensitive to certain textures, such as clothing. They might prefer to only wear certain fabrics or clothes with no tags. They might not like being touched or being hugged. Other individuals might be deep pressure seeking or use things like weighted blankets. Or they have weighted vests that, would probably be something that you would see more in the public setting. The vestibular sense is controlled by our inner ear and refers to our body's ability to balance. For example, learning to walk or riding a bike. Interoception helps us to understand what's going on inside our bodies. For example, when we need to use the bathroom, or when the body signals us that we're hungry, thirsty, sick, or even full. And so these are signals that might get mixed up or overlooked among neurodivergent individuals. Proprioception is it really refers to our body awareness, like where our body is in space, and involves motor control and motor planning. So like knowing where to scratch an itch without looking, or knowing how much force to use when writing with a pencil, hand-eye coordination, things like that. Next slide. And neurodivergent individuals can be hypersensitive or hyposensitive to different sensory processing. And actually we all can, right? I mean, there's it's just to a greater extent in neurodivergent individuals. Hypersensitive or oversensitive is when we have a strong reaction to incoming sensory stimuli. And then hyposensitive or undersensitive is when we have a weakened response to incoming stimuli. And individuals who are hyposensitive might be sensory seeking, which is a craving or fascination with a particular sensory experience. So if you have a weakened response to a stimuli, you might seek that sensory experience out. And it's just important to note that the same individual can vary between extremes across all of these. So, one individual might be hypersensitive to touch, but hyposensitive to smells or tastes. And it can and often does vary within the same individual. Next slide. Neurodivergent individuals may have difficulty identifying and expressing emotions. This does not mean they cannot empathize with others. That's a common myth, particularly with autistic individuals. However, neurodivergent individuals often do have more instances of negative emotions than this says non-autistic, but really any neurotypical or the neurotypical population. And this could be due to all of the difficulties with sensory processing that's going on that we just talked about, or difficulties with social interaction or communication, which, all of that would likely result in having more negative emotions for most people. And there's an image on this screen of a child crying. Next slide. Neurodivergent individuals also have difficulties with cognitive function. This can include things like inattention, trouble staying focused, or daydreaming is really common. And these behaviors are typical mostly in, you'll see it a lot in ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You also might see particularly autistic individuals hyper-focusing on a special interest. And we all do that to some extent at certain times. The difference is they may hyper-focus on things that others find odd, or, you know, not something that's socially acceptable. Like I've known neurodivergent individuals that are hyper focused on fans or straws, or and maybe they were children in both of these cases. You know, maybe they will grow up to be like the next inventor of a certain type of fan or a certain type of straw, and that's great, and that could be the reason for their hyper focus. But for neurotypicals, it appears, the special interest appears to be like an odd fascination. Versus, you know, neurotypicals, when we get hyper focused on something, like for instance, you know, if someone wants to take up like a new hobby, like rock climbing or something, I don't know, it's not viewed as socially unacceptable, even though it might be highly dangerous. And yeah, there might be a lot of danger associated with that. For me, it's research or reading. So when I get hyper focused on something, I typically just you know, ingest all of the information I possibly can about that topic. And it's not seen as being an odd thing, right? Even though, you know, who's to judge how odd our special interests are. Other cognitive functions neurodivergent individuals might struggle with are executive functions like planning, organization, decision-making, self-control, working memory, time management. They might have enhanced memory and information retention. This really just depends on the person. And they might also be really good at pattern recognition and complex problem solving. Next slide. Some behaviors you might see in neurodivergent individuals include self-stimulatory behaviors, which we also call stimming. This includes things like hand flapping, rocking, twirling. And again, I added pen clicking and biting nails in here because those are viewed as more socially acceptable stims, right? I mean, I've seen people do, well, I've seen people do all of these things, but the last two in particular are really common in like the office setting. And we don't think anything of it really, right? But if somebody started flapping their hands at work, you know, we might judge them a little more harshly, which is unfair. It's all a form of stimming, and stimming has been shown to be kind of a way to regulate our emotions, or you know, it's a rewarding experience, sometimes a calming experience for us. Self-injurious behaviors such as head banging, arm biting, and skin scratching are less common. These are often with non-speaking or non-verbal populations because they're having trouble getting their thoughts across to others. Impulsivity, difficulty taking turns or risk-taking behavior, hyperactivity, squirming, or movement that just doesn't really fit the setting. Next slide. Some physical symptoms you might see in neurodivergent individuals include gastrointestinal problems, selective eating, sleep disturbances, hypermobility, motor difficulties, things like an odd gait, tiptoe walking, etc. They also have a higher reported prevalence of chronic pain. And I put this in this presentation because I think it's just important for us all to be aware of these things, because it might add to someone's stress levels, right? Or, you know, if you're dealing with all of that kind of behind the scenes, even though it might not be apparent, you might wonder why someone is more irritable or short with you, or you know, and it could be because they're experiencing some or all of these symptoms in the background. Next slide. Other characteristics you might see in neurodivergent individuals include communication difficulties. You might see them using AAC, or augmentative and alternative communication devices, to communicate. This could be an iPad, or it could be little picture cards that they use to communicate. And my advice there is to just not be afraid to support them if that's how they communicate. Don't be afraid to just kind of jump right in and try to learn how to use those forms of communication. They also might have difficulty understanding figurative language like metaphors, simile, idioms. And I always get all of those mixed up. So if you have to Google them to remember like which one's which, that's totally fine. But the point is, it just, until you have an understanding of kind of what an individual's comfort level is with certain figurative language, if at all, just try to stick to more concrete language. They might also have specific learning difficulties. These can co-occur with all of the disorders we've been talking about, particularly dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia are learning disorders that affect math, reading, and writing, and those are all forms of neurodivergence. Research does show that there's a correlation between neurodivergence and creativity. So these individuals might be more motivated by music or art, or building things, or, you know, whatever. If you're trying to, you know, find an individual's motivation, that might be a good place to start. They might also be more detail oriented and more observant, but that just depends on the individual. Next slide. So now we'll talk about mistreatment and discrimination and some of its effects. Next slide. So some of the different areas of mistreatment or discrimination or the effects caused by the mistreatment or discrimination include bullying and abuse, employment issues, isolation, masking, camouflaging, racial and ethnic disparities, and health disparities. And you know, all of these are things that might result in further or new health problems or diminished quality of life. Next slide. Neurodivergent individuals are 65 to 90%, 94% more likely to be bullied on a regular basis. And the reason for that range is because we're dealing with lots of different disorders here. right? So some of the disorders may be more likely to be bullied, and some may not be as likely. But even if you take the lower end of that range, 65%, that's really high. They're also 3.7 times more likely to be a victim of bullying, 4 times more likely to be a victim of abuse. 70% of adults reported experiencing some form of sexual victimization. And then financial abuse and deception is also really common with this population, with individuals with all disabilities. And that's something we often don't think about when we're thinking of abuse. Financial abuse is a form of abuse. Next slide. Masking and camouflaging is it's basically how neurodivergent individuals modify their behavior to conform to social norms that were put in place by neurotypical people. And it's 70% of autistic adults in particular reported that they consistently camouflage. And I reported on autistic adults because I think that's one of the higher masking and camouflaging groups. And the one that we probably have the most research on so far. Some of the consequences of masking or camouflaging are that it can prevent the person from being understood and helped. And it can lead to increased stress, depression, and anxiety. There's an image on the screen of a feminine figure crying while pulling a mask off her face, and a quote that says, I want to avoid the bullying mostly. And that quote is from a research participant that was asked why they mask. Next slide. So there are racial and ethnic disparities among neurodivergent individuals compared to neurotypical individuals. The age that children are when the parent suspects developmental delays does not differ based on racial or ethnic group. And the prevalence of neurodivergence does not differ between racial or ethnic groups. However, the average age of diagnosis for white children is 6.3 years. The average age for Black children is 7.9 years, and the average age of diagnosis for Hispanic children is 8.8 years. And so there's a huge range of there's a huge delay in diagnosis for racial and ethnic minority groups. And even higher socioeconomic status Latinx children receive fewer autism services than white children. And so even if a family has the same or similar levels of income or education, they still receive fewer services for their children, which is a huge problem. Something else I wanted to note on this slide is that a lot of the racial and ethnic minority groups, the children are often labeled as having behavior problems in school rather than receiving a diagnosis of autism or ADHD or anything else. And they're often, you often see higher rates of suspension, expulsion, discipline of some sort, and higher rates of diagnoses of oppositional defiant disorder. Next slide. Employment issues, which is my area of research. Individuals with disabilities are unemployed and underemployed at rates far greater than their non-disabled peers. And underemployment is basically just, either you're not getting paid what you should be getting paid, or you're employed in a position that doesn't really take advantage of all of your skills. Many neurodivergent adults choose not to disclose their disability at work due to fear of stigma. And this is even though there are some laws in place to protect disabled workers from discrimination, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act. And neurodivergent individuals may face employment challenges for a variety of reasons. And this includes missing work due to physical or mental health issues, medication changes or side effects, social burnout, etc. So not only are they unemployed or underemployed at higher rates, they also just face more issues at work when they are employed. Next slide. We covered most of this. Disabled people of color often have less access to a personal doctor and poorer health care compared to disabled white individuals. Families from rural areas have less access to care than families from urban areas. Something of note at the bottom, for autism specifically, their life expectancy is 16 to 36 years less compared to non-autistic people. The suicide rates are 28 times higher than the general population. They have a high likelihood of accident or injury and lack of access to quality health care. Next slide. 1/2 to 2/3 of autistic young adults have no close friendships. They're more likely to never see friends, never get called by friends, never be invited to activities. And those with limited conversation ability, lower functional skills, and not living independently are more likely to be socially isolated. And there's a quote on this slide that says, "If you didn't have friends around, which was the case with me for a while, you feel alone and feel as though the whole world is against you." And that is a quote from a research participant. Next slide. All right, so now we'll talk about neurodiversity in public service specifically. Next slide. Just as a reminder, we covered this earlier, 20% of people are neurodivergent, and these are mostly invisible or non-apparent disabilities. And due to masking and camouflaging behaviors, we often don't know or realize whether or not the person we're talking to or working with is neurodivergent. Many, if not all, of the conditions we have talked about so far are invisible. And this gives us an opportunity to treat everyone we meet with dignity and respect, and to not be scared to form relationships with others who might not act like us, or who we might not understand. There are many benefits of inclusion, whether it be in our workplace or the customers and clients we serve, other than it's just the right thing to do. So in the box here, I've listed out several benefits of including neurodivergent individuals. And the first one says accommodations made for neurodivergent individuals may benefit others. An example of this is curb cuts, right? They were originally designed for people in wheelchairs, but they also benefit people using strollers or riding a bike if they need to like transition onto a sidewalk or off of a sidewalk, or delivery drivers. Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to curb cuts other than the original design that they were intended for. Another example is the keyboard or the typewriter. The typewriter was originally designed by an inventor whose friend was blind, and he realized that she wasn't able to handwrite letters, so he invented the typewriter, which then evolved into the keyboard. Another good example is closed captions. My kids and I, or subtitles, my kids and I use the subtitles on all of the movies and shows we watch. And we, don't have a medical reason to do so. It's just sometimes accommodations that are created for one purpose end up serving more than just the people they were created for. Another benefit of inclusion is that neurodivergent individuals' unique thinking styles, coping strategies, and life experiences can lead to better problem solving and innovation. Recognizing the valuable aspects of human diversity helps neurodivergent individuals feel included and understood. Many neurodivergent individuals have a strong sense of social justice and are passionate about standing up for others and the environment. So if we take steps to include them in our environment, chances are that will have some type of impact on, allowing them to really reach their full potential, whatever that may be. For some of them, it might be, working towards social justice or standing up for others or the environment in some other way. Kind of like a pay it forward type of thing. Next slide. The next two slides are more concrete solutions and some of the problems that I've heard about from others, and that I think you all probably deal with in your lines of work potentially. So for the problem of waiting in long and slow lines, one potential solution to including neurodivergent individuals or making their experience more comfortable is to provide seating or give them like a number or a buzzer to hold their place in line, or like when you go to a restaurant and you give them their phone number and it says they'll text you when your table's ready, so they can kind of go be in their comfort zone, whether that's in their car or whatever it is that they need to do to maybe get out of a high sensory stimuli environment and be in a more friendly sensory environment for them. Another problem could be sensory overstimulation, which is related. So I've seen some businesses implement fragrance-free spaces in their buildings, play quiet music or no music. I know this is hard for some of us. I love my music, but the solution obviously is for everyone to just listen to their own music through headphones or whatever that may be at their workstations. Something else you could do is offer sensory friendly hours or a sensory room. Some businesses have offered sensory friendly hours where they allow certain shopping times for neurodivergent individuals. And then I've seen some of the like major sports stadiums install sensory rooms, which you can get as fancy or as simple with this as your budget allows. Something else to do is to utilize timers, like visual timers. And the reason for this might be an individual might be able to tolerate sensory overstimulation for like a few minutes. So if they know like, hey, I only have to sit in here for 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes or whatever it may be, they might be able to tolerate it. But if they don't know, like when, like if there's an end in sight, they might get a little more uncomfortable. Another problem could be filling out long forms, and this could be helped by providing job aids, breaks while they're filling out forms, multiple ways to enter data. So, handwritten versus typed versus having someone to type it in for you, or allowing them to listen to music while they do this. Another problem could be difficulty with changes in routine. And one solution to this is just to prepare them in advance. Some individuals, this can be just verbally or, saying like in 10 minutes, we're going to switch to this, or we're going to run to the post office, or we're going to, whatever it might be. For others, they might need an actual picture schedule that shows, kind of what their day is going to look like. First we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. And then removing each picture as you go through the schedule, so they know they're getting closer to the end of the day, where they can have their free time or whatever it may be. Timers, again, are great for changes in routine. If they have a visual timer that shows them, this is how long I have to wait before something changes, we're just more likely to be able to tolerate that, right? And then explain, like I've noticed so many things can be helped or solved by just taking the time to explain to someone what's going on. A lot of times, especially in the business world, if we are set in our routine and we're just like going through the motions of tasks that we do every day, so it's really monotonous to us, we might not fully explain things to our customer or our client, or a new employee or whoever it may be, and we assume that they would know or would understand, but really just taking the time and being patient and explaining things to people goes a long way. And that's regardless of whether they're neurodivergent or not. Next slide, please. Okay. Learning style, processing speed, just allowing them time to respond, using multiple means of representation. So showing things in writing, showing them visually, presenting them auditorially. People have a variety of ways they like to intake information. Difficulty with attention and focus can be solved by allowing them to listen to music or play with a fidget, or just standing up and walking around while they're, doing the activity, or while they're waiting. We have it in our minds that people have to sit still and be quiet while they're waiting, but as long as they're not disrupting others too much, is there a reason why they can't stand occasionally? And just trying to think outside of the box that way. For interactions with law enforcement specifically, I think just training on communication. And so, like being ready to use the AAC devices that we talked about, like whether it be an iPad or PEX cards. I call them PEX cards, sorry. It's called the Picture Exchange Communication System. And it's just cards with little pictures on them. And in some professions, especially like education, people carry around like a lanyard full of the most common cards that they can use to interact with people that are nonverbal or non-speaking. Yeah, just being aware that elopement is common. So, you know, running away from parents or caregivers or from home, or and just being aware that, you know, especially autistic kids in particular, they might want to go for a walk for, you know, and their parent might not be aware of it. And so just being prepared to respond in those situations. And I know there's lots of good trainings out there for this. I'm not trying to like train anyone today. And then using simple concrete language like we talked about earlier, giving plenty of time to process or respond. That's a big one. So, you know, if processing speed is slower, they're going to need extra time to respond. And then just avoid using lights or sirens when possible if you know you're dealing with somebody that is aversive to those things. Next slide. Okay, and this is just in general, some more things that we can do, or just listen to neurodivergent narratives, push for more neurodiversity programs and development training, embrace neurodiversity socially in the workplace, and share what you learn with others. And there's a quote on the slide that says, "It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." Next slide. So there is a list of references and resources available at that website listed here, and also my contact information. And I think we can see if there's any questions. But thank you all for listening.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Carrie, for that very informative presentation. I love how you highlighted that learning about neurodiversity gives us the opportunity to treat everyone with dignity and respect. And so I hope that's something that everyone put a pin in. We do have a few questions in the Q&A, and I want to encourage anyone who is listening at this time, if you have additional questions for Carrie, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A, and I will read the questions that we have so far. This question says, regarding the age of average diagnosis, was the data based on parents being the same race or ethnicity as children getting the diagnosis?
That is a good question. I will have to look that study up and see. I have a feeling, just if I had to guess, that it was more about the parents' race and ethnicity, because of the way that it pointed out that socioeconomic status didn't have any effect. So yeah, I would guess that yes, they were the same race or ethnicity as the children. But I would have to look that up. And I can give you the article if you are interested, but I'm sorry, I don't know that off the top of my head.
This is Tiara speaking. Carrie, is that included in the resources in the hyperlink in the PowerPoint that you provided? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, let's see. We have another question that is asking for your contact information. I know that that is also included in the PowerPoint information, but for those who may watch this recording later, do you mind just stating your contact or the best way to contact you, Carrie, please?
Yes, of course. By email, it's Carrie, Kari, Sher, SHER, at umich.edu.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you. We have another question in the chat, and this is coming from, it says, coming from a person in an IT related job. Do you see any trends in types of employment for people with autism or who are neurodivergent? It says STEM type jobs versus social work, humanities, teaching, etc. So do you see any trends in types of employment?
Yeah, I know that there are high prevalences of neurodivergent employees in the fields of, programming, IT, engineering, etc. I also know that people that do this type of work or research are really trying to provide other options as well, so that neurodivergent individuals have a choice. If they prefer engineering or programming jobs, that's fine. That's 100% okay. But if the reason they're not accessing those other types of jobs is due to something that we are doing wrong as far as recruiting or interviewing or something of that nature, we want to make sure that we're not putting up a barrier for them to enter those fields if it is indeed something that they are interested in doing.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you, Carrie. We have another question that says, I'm a web administrator. What best practices should I be implementing to make sure my website content is more accessible to neurodivergent individuals?
Yeah, so there are a lot of resources out there on this very thing right now, and that is a very growing field right now. And my number one recommendation would just be to look at the WebAIM website, webaim.org, I believe. And yeah, I think that has as much information as anyone could possibly need, and or it will lead you to other resources as well.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you, Carrie. We have another question that says, I have heard and I've read varied citations about children in neurodivergence. Where can I find more adult neurodivergence citations?
Yeah, so that is changing as well. Historically, most of the research has been done on children. I would say that has started to change in the last 10 years or so. And more research has come out about adults. It's easier to look up research on specific disorders than it is to look up research on neurodiversity. I'm hoping that changes in the near future as well. But right now, it's been hard to do research on neurodiversity because everyone is still kind of ironing out, like, okay, what is this? What does this include? Different groups feel like it includes different disorders. Some people don't believe you have to identify with a disorder at all, that it's more of an identity. And so, yeah, the research on neurodiversity right now is pretty sparse. And it kind of just depends on if you're particularly interested in a certain disorder or a certain age group or a certain characteristic or problem, you might be able to narrow it down a little bit more, but yeah.
All right, so this is Tiara speaking. We have time for one more question that is in the chat. It says, regarding racial and ethnic disparities, are these disparities due to bias on the part of the healthcare provider, the culture of the parents, with them being less likely to seek help, or both? Do we have information regarding that, Carrie?
I would say all of the above. There is so much research out there about the bias of healthcare providers on different racial and ethnic minority groups, which in turn, causes parents to be less likely to seek out help in those places. If you feel like you're not being heard, why would you continue to go back to a system that is not listening to you? And so, yeah, there's a lot of research on that right now as well. And hopefully, well, I know that it's changing. It's just slow. But yeah, I would say it's a little bit of all of the above.
This is Tiara speaking. Unfortunately, that is our time for today. As we close, I would like to thank you so much, Carrie, for your time being here today and for all the information that you have shared with us. Today's presentation was very well needed, and it is our hope that everyone who participated walks away not only with a better understanding of neurodiversity, but also with a charge to advocate for accessible public services for everyone here in Michigan. For those of you interested in learning more about the work of the Disability Rights and Compliance Division, please visit the Michigan Department of Civil Rights website at www.michigan.gov/MDCR. Also, we would like to invite you to our next forum, which is scheduled for Thursday, May 16th at 1 p.m., when we will explore ways to make reading accessible for all. We hope to see you then, and bye for now. Thank you for joining us.